I'm going to use this, but if it gets too loud, just go like this. It won't be the first time it's happened to me. Talking about Father's Day, you know, my daughter, my youngest daughter is 12 years old, and last night she was asking me, well, Dad, where are you going tomorrow? And I showed her the flyer for today's event, and she said, well, that's an old picture. I said, well, thank you very much. It's nice to have the truth told to you by your 12-year-old. That's always great. I am really thrilled that you're here on a Saturday morning with the Catholic Medical Group. I'm so excited that there is a Catholic Medical Guild started up. I think that's really important for where we're at today. And, you know, I'm sure that you're really interested in being here because everybody thinks it's a great idea to talk about religion and politics. Okay, this is my life, religion and politics. I don't get invited to many dinner parties, but I do enjoy getting invited to groups like this to get a chance to talk to you about what we're up to. I do work for the 4 bishops in Iowa. During the legislative session, I'm at the Capitol every day, you know, lobbying on the various respect to life and social justice positions of the church. In addition to, we do a lot of work for Catholic schools as well. So I'm happy to do that. Another part of my job is to do things like this. The bishops really take their job seriously in terms of helping Catholics inform their conscience and taking action on that in the political arena. So this is, I think, a very important thing that we try to do. And in fact, later this year, you'll see some documents and other information coming out from the bishops, you know, through groups like this and others in the state and through the parishes, to talk about the election season and what we should be looking for. So, you know, with all that, you know, I'd say bad press, you know, that you see about politics these days, this really is a great time for a Catholic who's interested in political activity. You know, we've got a very strange election season. I'm going to call it strange coming up, I think, this fall. Probably one of the strangest we've had since maybe 1968. 1948, you know, it's a very different season. So today we'll talk about a couple different things. First, I'm going to start by addressing 2 key issues, which are very much priorities of the Catholic Church right now in the legislative mode. One of them is at the federal government, one of them is at the state government. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about what the bishops are saying in terms of our political activity and voting. So certainly there will be time for questions and answers and discussion, and this will be very informal. So when the time comes, if you have a question, you know, just raise your hand if you want to do that, and I'll also stop and ask if there are any questions as we go forward as well. So just appreciate you being here, and we'll kind of get started. Really, both of these are high priorities for the Catholic Church right now. And for some years, at the federal level, we've been working on Congress to reform some current federal laws on conscience rights, especially to protect individuals and institutions, you know, healthcare institutions who object to abortion. This is a high priority. And as a matter of fact, right now at the federal government level, we have what is called the Weldon Amendment. And that does protect the conscience rights of individuals and institutions from getting involved in abortion. And really, how it works is it would require a state, if they would, go against someone who has a conscience problem with abortion, the federal government is obligated to withhold their health care funds like Medicaid, any education funds, and any funds that have to do with labor. So the federal government is supposed to be withholding those funds from states. Unfortunately, because that's the only remedy in the law, Weldon is not enforced very much at all. So for example, and we'll talk about a couple specific examples, but the Weldon Amendment is not enforced, and so we're working to improve it. So I want you to think about a couple of what-if scenarios. Okay, I want you to imagine these. What if you spent years training to help sick people, only to find out that to keep your job, you would have to participate in the killing of a 20-week-old unborn child? That's one example. You know, what if you're the pastor of a Catholic parish and you provide great health care insurance for your employees and for your school teachers, but you're told that the plan is illegal unless it covers elective abortions? Okay, third example. What if Catholic charities, your local Catholic charities, were providing great service for victims of human trafficking through a government grant? But they lost the grant to secular agencies who are not as well qualified because they can't comply with the government mandate to do abortion referrals. Okay, 3 examples. All 3 of those situations have happened already. For example, right now, the state of California is requiring all healthcare insurance plans, even by parishes, to cover all abortions. And that's locked up in a court battle right now in California. So one of the ways we're trying to fix these conscience situations is to pass the Conscience Protection Act of 2016. It would protect all healthcare providers from having to pay for or participate in abortions. And here's the key part. It would allow all the victims of discrimination to take their case as a private right of action in court. And that's the key difference. Because right now with, for example, the state of California, with what they're doing, they're violating the federal Weldon Amendment. They're in violation of law. But the only remedy is to withhold all Medicaid funds from California. And even if the Obama administration wanted to enforce that law, which they don't, if they wanted to, that would be the only remedy. And that's not realistic to withhold, all those billions of dollars in healthcare funds from a particular state. So that's why we need to improve the Weldon Amendment, and that's why we're working on the Conscience Protection Act, this year. That's our goal. And so, for example, we've been meeting with our members of Congress here on the Iowa side. Representative Young, who's got Southwest Iowa, has agreed to be a co-sponsor. We'd certainly encourage your contacts with Representative Loebsack, or I think Representative Bustos on the other side of the river, to encourage them to support this. And it's going to be a heavy lift with Democrats right now, but we need to contact them and let them know. So we need to do this in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So the best way to do that is to go to the grassroots arm of the U.S. Catholic Bishops for pro-life issues, and the website is called humanlifeactioncenter.org. So if you go to humanlifeactioncenter.org, you'll see action alerts and you'll see background information on the Conscience Protection Act. And so this is something we're really trying to push in the next few weeks, because we'd like the House committee to take it up and pass it with some amendments probably, but we'd like them to pass that yet this summer before their August recess. So this is something that we can really do right now to help with that situation. Okay, that's the federal piece. I also want to talk with you about an important issue at the state level, and what we call doctor-prescribed suicide. This is a nationwide fight right now. It's come to Iowa particularly. There's been some discussion in Illinois. And basically these bills that are being pushed to different state legislators will allow a physician to prescribe legal and lethal medication for people who have been judged by 2 physicians to be in the last 6 months of life. So the way we like to think about this issue is it's really not about rights for patients, but it really is about rights for physicians to do this. That's what the bill does. Now here in Iowa, the good news is that both the Iowa and the Senate did have bills, but they were both defeated this year. They didn't advance out of committee. And this has been a priority for us to get ready for the last several years. And as a matter of fact, there's a statewide coalition being formed to defeat these bills in the future. And Iowa already has been targeted for 2017, depending upon what happens in the elections this fall. Iowa has been targeted as a state to pass this legislation. So certainly if any of you are interested in being a part of that coalition and getting information, I'd like to talk to you at a later time to do that. Right now we're working with some of the traditional groups that you might think would be involved, like the Catholic Conference and Right to Life and things like that. But more importantly, we're working with disability rights groups and people who are concerned about elder abuse. And they hopefully will be the public face of this effort to fight this bill. And we've had some local trainings already, and one of the reasons that I call that doctor-prescribed suicide is because that's kind of what's been polled and tested as working message-wise. We're trying to message this very, very carefully in terms of ways that would raise questions for people about the procedures and things like that. So this will definitely be a priority for the Catholic Conference, in the next, I would say probably the coming years. And I expect us to be able to defeat this legislation in Iowa, at least for the next couple of years, but it's something that we're going to have to pay constant attention to. Now, on the pastoral side, we're talking politics here. On the pastoral side, the bishops of Iowa have approved a recommendation to begin a sustained education effort on end-of-life care. And so I want you guys in particular to be thinking about this. We've been working with some of the ethicists and people surrounding the Catholic hospital systems in Iowa on this project. And so what's going to be happening this summer is that the 4 dioceses of Iowa are going to be recruiting and starting to train facilitators who will be able to work one-on-one with parishioners on their advanced care directives. And so this is a way that we really want to start those conversations with families early rather than late. And I think many of you know that those discussions often don't happen until it's way too far the line. And we know nurses will be a big part of this and physicians. And so once again, if you're interested in helping out with this project, you're not making a forever commitment, week to week. But if you're interested in just learning more about this project, once again, let me know, and we'll be glad to kind of give you more information on that. And so this is the bishop's way of, I think it's fair to say that the Catholic Church kind of has a reputation for saying no to a lot of things, no to everything. And this is really the bishops wanting to say yes, to say something about positive about our healthcare system and positive about the care we want to receive at the end of our lives. And so I think they're very much supportive of this project. Part of the difficulty we have, and it could be in this room as well, is that most of the people who call themselves Catholic support assisted suicide. That's what the polls say. And so it's very much not a Democrat or Republican thing. I think it's a very individual, as you would know, a very individual question, because we've all had situations that we've been involved with, whether in our families or our practice, where people have died, and it's been very painful, and the family situation is very painful. So we understand why people want to have compassion to end it. Certainly from our perspective, the Catholic Church, we're supposed to be stewards of our life. God gives us life, and we're supposed to be good stewards of our life. And it's not for us to say when that decision should be made, when it's time for us to go. But at the same time, those messages are good for Catholics, but they're not good for the general public. I think the main thing that we work against, compassionate choices, which used to be the Hemlock Society. And their main message is, well, that's fine for you. You're a religious person. We don't really take a religious viewpoint. That's just a decision that I want to make. And, it's a fair argument, but I think it's also fair to say, as we know from the Catholic community, that sometimes decisions we make personally affect other people. And we're very concerned about the effect that it could have over time for older people and for people who are sick but may not want to commit suicide. And so our strategy is not about finding the magic message that's going to defeat this bill, but what will defeat this bill is when people just start to ask questions about it. And there's 100 questions that could be asked about this bill. And we don't have time to get into all those things today, but I'd be happy to, if anybody's interested, we can talk about that later. But just a couple things to think about. I'm just going to leave you a couple questions on this issue before we move on. Think about it. Will the state Medicaid program and private insurers over time do the right thing or the cheap thing? Okay. Another question. How many of you know of someone who has outlived a terminal diagnosis? There's a lot of loopholes in this legislation that we're going to identify over time. In fact, in Oregon, it's already happened. They've had this for almost 20 years now, and they assumed once, a couple states would get it, it would spread all over the country. Well, it hasn't, because a lot of the questions and problems with it. One of the things in Oregon that they did is and this happened, they sent a letter through their state Medicaid program. Well, we can't cover this chemotherapy, even though it's approved by the FDA, we can't cover it because it's expensive. However, we will cover a prescription for you to end your life. That's the letters that went out to many, I would say several people, as this was being implemented. But don't worry, they've changed their ways. They're not doing that anymore. They do that through a phone call. Okay? So this is, the number of people who have been committing suicide through this provision in Oregon has been growing. And not coincidentally, in my opinion, the suicide rate in general in Oregon has been growing. Because, you've got a two-faced message. For these people, at this point, suicide might be okay. But what does that say to a young person who's struggling? There's no, if you think of the logic through it, there's no logical reason that they shouldn't be able to commit suicide. They're suffering. They're in great suffering sometimes. You know that as young people. Why do we withhold that from them and not from people who are supposedly 6 months away from death? So we got a lot of things, to deal with on that issue. The very first person, and we'll never see her again at a meeting, but the very first person who talked to the legislature said, I received a diagnosis that I had 6 months to live 3 years ago. And then everybody, it totally was, messed up on their messaging, And it's like, you want to feel compassion, and you have to have compassion for every person who's in front of you. And I just wanted to say at that point, we're really glad you're here. We're glad you're still here. But anyway, we got a lot of work to work on this issue. So before we talk about some of the politics and the electoral season, I don't know if you have any questions about the Conscience Protection Act or the assisted suicide issue as it's coming forth in Iowa.
Well, I always have questions. For one thing, just very briefly, what was the number of that House bill on the vote on the
Oh,
Conscience
golly, you
Protection?
had to ask me the number of the House bill. I'll find it before we go. I think it's 4828, but I'll check that before we go.
It is. Secondly, there's an organization I've been aware of, and I don't know who else here might be aware of it. It used to be called International something on Euthanasia. Now it's called Patients' Rights Council. So
Yes.
That's a wonderful organization, and they really, I get like a monthly newsletter, and I've been, I've known about that. In fact, Rita Marker, I think she's one in charge, but she was several years ago here for a Right to Life dinner. She was the guest. Secondly, I updated my will a year and a half ago, and I had quite a discussion with my attorney. And he wasn't cheap, but I think he's good. And he was a new attorney for me. But anyway, I was very concerned. Right to Life here has its own advanced directive form, or healthcare power of attorney. And he did not like either of the hospital's forms, so I showed him the Right to Life form, and he kind of dismissed it because about HIPAA, and I don't know, there was something in there. Actually, it was in there. He just didn't bother to look at it. But anyway, he agreed. I said, well, here's this form that talks about the doctor at the beginning of the form. And so I said, who has the say-so, the family or the doctor? And we were in agreement that, he said, no, that should be last resort. And really having that conversation with the family is really important. And the hospital forms, he had his own form that he made, and he also keeps updated on the latest legislation or legal stuff, which of course he should do. In that these forms can be very vague. I mean, how do you know what they really mean? I don't want life-sustaining treatment, for instance. What does that mean? And so I went with his form.
Yeah, I gotcha. Well, you made 2 points. One is the Patient Rights Council is a great source of information on doctor-prescribed suicide. In fact, they're the group that's helping us put together our coalition. And we had Rita Marker in last month, to have an initial conversation with some of the key people about that. So that's a great group to get information from. And then, there's a number of different directives that are out there. And our goal will be to have something that could be customizable, obviously, but something that is within Catholic teaching, Catholic moral teaching. And if you want to get a preview of some similar information, if you go to the Archdiocese of Dubuque website, they've got some, or actually, our website was down overnight, but it's back. But if you go to iowacatholicconference.org and click on Supportive Care Iowa, that's going to be the name of the pastoral initiative. We do have some resources that you can click on and see some directives that certainly would be within what we're hoping to get across to Catholic people. Thank you for that.
I was wondering if you would care to comment, or anybody here, about that new movie, this very popular movie that's out now. You heard about this? Me Before You.
And Me Before You.
I haven't seen it, but a lot of people I follow on Twitter, they Christian community have been, rightfully challenging the really insidious premises underneath the movie, but I think it's very popular. A lot of couples are going to see that movie, and probably if you have teenage daughters, you're probably going to go want to see that movie. It's like being billed as this great romantic thing, but I don't know if you can just say a few words.
Yeah, me, not you. It's about someone who falls in love with a man that's in a wheelchair, and they have. It's a very romantic movie, but then he decides he wants to kill himself, in my understanding, and she helps him do that. And so, of course, that's a pretty common theme. Romeo and Juliet and things like that. Young love, romantic. Till death do us part. But and I believe it's certainly indicative of where our culture is going, which is very individualistic and libertarian in some ways. That I make decisions for me, and we don't worry about the rest of the group. And so I think that's something to watch out for. I haven't seen it yet, so I intend to see it. And just kind of see what it's like. But yeah, I think the message is, at first it seems kind of good because you show his life isn't over, but then he wants to end it. So.
Well, the message that I was reading is kind of the whole first two acts are all about follow your dreams, life is worth living. Even if you're quadriplegic in a wheelchair, you can find love.
Mm-hmm.
But then in the last act, it's just kind of like, except if you have disability, then your life really isn't worth living. I guess the last scene of the movie, spoiler alert, is the guy's wealthy, and she's prancing through Paris, spending all his money that he left to her. Just, enjoying life, living. So happy that she was able to be a part of his peaceful exit out of this world. And, I'm not easy to shock, but I read that, I'm like, that is messed up.
Yeah, thanks for the heads up on that.
Yeah, Iowa and Illinois both have the iPost and the iPolls.
Yes.
Now, is that going to cause a whole lot more? What are we supposed to sign? Here's another form.
Yeah, that will be part of our education. The first thing, and those are physician orders, basically, and that they're physician orders. I'll say a couple things about that. One is you have to kind of know what the state law is. Every state that has passed this law has it done differently. In Iowa, we were able to put in a lot of protections compared to some other states because the people who were doing it were willing to work on it with us. And so we didn't support it, but we were able to get some things changed in Iowa's law that makes it very different from Wisconsin's, for example. And then some states are doing it even differently than that. There is going to be confusion about that because people see this very detailed form and think, well, this is something I should do. Well, it's not intended for anyone that, except for some people that might be just in the last weeks of their life. At best, that's what it would be used for. I think that it's fair to say I would say that would be at the bottom of the list for people to do, in terms of a Catholic perspective on it. I think it'd be much better to have an advanced care directive and have someone with power of attorney. Now, there may be some cases, we definitely want our wishes to be followed at the end of life, right? We have a right to that in the law. And I can see for some people that may be helpful, but it's not a general use document in any way. So that's the caution I would put out.
I just want to bring your attention to, since we're talking about assisted suicide, right? I'm a psychiatrist. Recently, I had a patient, a teenager, who kind of told me about my view on that. And of course, I said, well, if a person is depressed, it's not the person to decide whether they want to die or live, right? Because they're not in their right state of mind. That's the thinking. Now, he directed my attention to on YouTube. I think it's in Belgium or the Netherlands. It's one of those states that has a physician-assisted suicide for depression. So I have not really viewed much of those, but if you want to help each other, help us, can figure out. It seems like the way I viewed that 15-minute footage was that it's so superficially presented that this patient was giving testimonials of how depressed she's been and that her doctor is considering of assisting her to commit suicide. So just to bring it to your attention that this, I think, is ongoing in that part of the world, right, in Europe.
Yeah, and it's becoming active euthanasia. And so we do believe that's the way it will go here if we start with our law. But Americans know everything, and so we have found that to talk about the Netherlands really isn't relevant to most legislators. You know, they don't care. You know, they care about what's happening here, the church of what's happening right now in Iowa. A couple things I would say about our bill is that you can be depressed and get a prescription from your physician to kill yourself if that law would pass. It's just that the depression could not affect your judgment according to, you know, the law. There's other loopholes. 6 months depends how you define terminal diagnosis. If I stop taking my medication that I take every day, I probably will be dead in 6 months. So, would I qualify? You know, I mean, there's a lot of questions about that. And so, that's a great point to talk about. And even the law itself says that if a person chooses to get this prescription, the cause of death has to be the underlying medical condition. It is not suicide. So we remake the language, you know. But
will the life insurance companies see it that way?
the life insurance companies are starting to kind of just back away from it, as you would expect, you know, from that issue.
You mentioned that in Oregon we have a 20 years experience with this, and Europe has an even longer experience. For sure there are stories like what you mentioned that needs to be told, and are we good in bringing up those stories, tying them to specific individuals, and tell them to the world?
And we are certainly going to be doing the best we can from our coalition. And once again, if things go well, you'll never hear me do an interview about this issue. It will always be someone who is from the disabilities rights group or from elder abuse perspective. It won't be the Catholics, you know, or the pro-life group. But as to use a metaphor that's been used in our country before, you go to war with the army you have, and so, you know, we'll do what we have to do to stop the bill. But we hope to have messengers like that bring that message for sure.
So I had told myself I wasn't going to talk, but and in full disclosure, I am the physician champion for the Quad City IPOS community coalition that we have here. I'm the medical director for Genesis Hospice, and I work with these discussions and conversations all the time. Two things that you said that bothered me. One is that the IPOS document is to be used in the last couple of weeks of life, and I find that very untrue. As long as people's perception is that hospice care is only for the last couple of weeks of life, people will continue to receive the right kind of care that they deserve at the end of their life. If we have somebody that, Medicare provides a hospice benefit, most commercial insurances are kind of falling in line. There's some commercial insurances now that actually are carving out hospice care, which makes me very concerned. But Medicare and Medicaid provide a 6-month benefit for people to receive that kind of care. And as long as your hospice care is administered and directed by somebody who knows what they're doing, you can completely enhance and bring quality to people's life as it's coming to an end. I find that document, and the law states that it's for anybody, any age. Our out-of-hospital DNRs prior to this were for anybody 18 and older, and you had to have a terminal illness. Now it's anybody with a chronic illness. I'm an internist. I've only dealt primarily with elderly people and people towards the end of their life, and only sick people primarily. In my 20 years of practice now, and about 16 years of hospice work. So I think as long as people are not educated about what their options are, and as long as people believe that hospice care brings your death about sooner and does not enhance the last part of your life, we're going to continue to have this battle for providing care that really does not improve your life. It may make your death process longer. So if there's something that I can do to help,
I would love to talk about that.
educate the people. We actually have patterned ours off after the Gunderson Clinic model and have trained about 200 facilitators here in the immediate Quad Cities to have those conversations. One of my toughest audiences, though, are the physicians. The nurses, social workers, and those people, we're having great conversations with people, especially in long-term care facilities, trying to have more of those conversations in doctors' offices, but it's not a 15-minute conversation. So we're still pushing and forging ahead, and some of the attorneys do have them in their offices to fill those, and you're right, it is finally a doctor's order. And to your question, the family's wishes, the patient's wishes, actually is what's followed to begin with. The doctor cannot really supersede what the family's wishes are, but they don't necessarily have to provide care that you would consider futile, I guess. And that's always a question about what's futile and what's not. And quite honestly, if we have somebody that lives beyond their 6-month benefit in hospice, we call it a success story for us. So.
Yeah, and if I said weeks, I intended to say months. But your point, yeah, I meant to say months. Regarding polls and that idea, and everything you said is true. I mean, the Catholic Church, and that's one of the misnomers that, of course, many of you know about the Catholic Church, is that people think you have to have all care for all time, and that's, of course, not the case. It's not to people's benefit to do that. We do have, in fact, our committee that's working on this did go through the Gunderson model. They found it to be inadequate in one way, in that they kind of talk about it as being values-free in the training that they went through. And from our perspective, values-free is not values-free. It has a value, it's just a different value than you might expect. And so we intend to use part of the online module and then some in-person training for what we're going to do. And certainly palliative care is a big part of what the bishops would like to support. And so, in fact, some states, they're working with the American Cancer Society to do some legislation that has to do with palliative care. So I'd love to sit down and talk with you sometime about these things. That would be great.
To Ann's point, I'm, of course, as most, I'm a physician assistant, and so I'm the medical power of attorney for my parents. And my parents are in their 80s now. I'm 86, my dad's 86. But when he was 80, we sat down and did the advanced directive thing. And I think we have to, sometimes in medicine, we do everything to prolong life, but it's also death prolonging too. My father said he doesn't want, if he has a heart attack, don't do CPR. He's 80 years old, he's lived a full life, he hurts, he's done, right? So don't do that. He doesn't want to be brought back and left on a ventilator for for days to weeks to months. So yeah, he does not want to be resuscitated. And so that's his right. When death comes, he wants to be let go. And I think our society sometimes wants to do everything we can to keep them here. But to what end? That's at 80, now he's 86, has congestive heart failure. We're doing everything to treat that congestive heart failure, but he has that event. He doesn't want resuscitation. And we as a society need to accept death too. And I think that we sometimes have to distinguish between death prolonging and life prolonging, and what is that benefit sometimes.
And what you said is, certainly from the perspective of the Catholic bishops, is just right. I mean, and that's where we get into the situations where people assume that, once again, you have to have all care for all time, and that's not at all what the church is getting across. And so that's one of the things we have to be careful about, is, as we've seen, for how we talk about this. Yeah, I mean, you look at what's happening with the advances in palliative care today, and the bishops want to be very supportive of people making those decisions for themselves, and you don't have to have all care for all time. One of the things I run into at the Capitol is fewer and fewer people are seeing the distinction that the Catholic Church would see between caring for people at the end of life and having a substantial amount of morphine or whatever administered when that time comes. They don't see any difference between that and deliberately killing somebody. They don't see the difference in intention between providing care and killing somebody. And that's another issue that I have to deal with every day and trying to explain that for how we look at things as the Catholic Church.
Yeah, I think there is no problem in between. The problem is always with extremes. You have people who wants to have all care all the time, and somebody needs to pay for it. And then on another extreme, you have a person, I have a right to finish it right now, I don't care, I want what I want. But that's the problem, how to approach those two extremes.
I just want to make a comment and then a question for you. That me before you or you before me, there's a novel. I kind of skimmed it a little bit at Barnes & Noble, and initially this young woman is hired to care for this man, but he does have this intention. And toward the end, I mean, it's like, she's very against it, but it's like, don't try to convince me not to do this. So it's almost like she makes the conversion, which is the dangerous part of this. You know, I didn't know about the praising through character. But, and so it's really a propaganda, you know, and how it's important to watch movies and watch TV and read novels, whatever, because that's where, you know, like Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code, all his novels, they're very anti-religion. That's how people are persuaded through those stories. The other thing I wanted to, about the Quad City Times, is a very liberal newspaper, politically liberal newspaper. I think liberal is really a good thing if you're generous, but not politically liberal. Anyway, two things. One very recent showed a little girl with cerebral palsy. She weighs all 60 pounds. She's about 10 years old. Front page, color photo. How her mom copes with it and all the aids, and how sometimes she has tube feedings and she kind of gags. So the mom just does the tube feeding thing, which I thought was wonderful. Front page color, because it says like tube feeding isn't like this, oh my gosh, you know, life isn't worth living. This mom copes with it, I mean, with a lot of assistance. So I thought it was a terrific article. In opposition to that, a few months ago, the guy, and I don't remember his name, was a very short guest column on the editorial page about the assisted suicide movement, and he cited Oregon. It was a very short article, and he really didn't back up what he said very well at all. And Oregon, I mean, I think there's a lot of abuse of that, from what I've read from Patients' Rights Council. So if people don't pay attention to overseas, Oregon would be a good say, do you know this person, this person, this person, how this is, it isn't choice for a lot of people. And and also, I don't know if you read, I mean, it'd be very big challenge to read the newspapers. You want that, which major newspapers do you read? I mean, in Iowa, you know, there's probably half a dozen, you know, or do you want that brought to your attention?
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, the Des Moines Register is the one I see the most because I'm in Des Moines, and certainly this issue, assisted suicide, is going to be something they're going to be pushing on an every 2-week basis, editorially through the news stories. So that's going to be coming. We're going to move on now to talk about the political season for maybe the next 10 minutes or so, and I'm going to start a handout around, and also I will start a little sign-up sheet around that if you're interested in getting our legislative alerts, during the legislative season in Iowa, during the session, that's January through May usually, you'll get a newsletter once a week, and then any other alerts that come out, which aren't too frequently, and then maybe once a month outside the session. So I'm going to send this around, and if you'd like to get our emails, you can let us know. Just so you have some information, I'm giving you what is our 2016 legislative agenda for the Iowa Catholic Conference, just so you have that background information. Let's talk about this year, this fall. Certainly the U.S. bishops have a document that's called Forming Consciences for Faithful Citizenship. And it's about, 40 pages long, and so it's kind of hard to read, and then they put together some parish bulletin announcements and things like that. So that's what the U.S. bishops are doing. Here in Iowa, we're in the process of putting together some videos and a document which we hope to distribute through groups like this and parishes throughout the state of Iowa starting in August. It's going to look something like this. I can't hand it out to you because it's not finished yet, and so actually the bishops have this draft that they're looking at right now. But it basically will talk about our perspective on how we approach political activity and voting, and also what questions should we be asking candidates in Iowa, that sort of thing. So, but the first line of our document, I think, is going to be this, and this is what the bishops want to get across. Our cause is the defense of human life and dignity and the protection of the weak and vulnerable. So that's what our political activity is directed to in the state of Iowa, and certainly, nationwide. The defense of human life and dignity is fundamental, and so we're talking about fundamental right to life from conception until a natural death, as we've talked about. From there, it talks about concern for fair access to productive work and fair wages, education and health care. Everybody needs shelter. Everybody needs food, protection from any harm, freedom to immigrate. Those the bishops also consider to be rights. Those are the goods that we hold in common. So when you hear about the common good, we're talking about the goods that each one of us needs. We all need to eat. We all need shelter. We all need health care. We all need education. So we have a duty to work for those things, that all people could receive those things. We also have a duty to safeguard the family as our basic unit of society. And we also want to support mediating institutions. And by mediating institutions, I mean groups like this. Could be sports teams, could be professional organizations. Those are the type of charitable groups that really help our society cope with our big challenges. And so we don't want groups like government or even the church or whatever to kind of overshadow all of those things. We need to have those mediating institutions as well. And these commitments come to us straight from Scripture, from the Hebrew prophets and from the gospel. We're supposed to be bringing good news to the poor, liberty to captives. We're supposed to be bringing sight to the blind, set the downtrodden free. And that's Jesus quoting Isaiah. You look at Exodus, chapter 20, it tells us, "You shall not kill." These things are not options for us as Catholics. These are things that the prophets and Jesus is calling us to be about. So as a part of this effort, we have a duty to vote if we are able to vote. We have a duty to inform ourselves about the candidates and to vote very conscientiously. We can decide to write in a candidate's name if we want to do that, or in some extraordinary cases, we may decide not to vote for a particular office. Our choice really needs to be about what is, the common good of all. That needs to be foremost in our mind. And, everybody votes, based on different things. And when I do presentations in parishes, I usually ask people, put aside your identity as a Democrat or a Republican. And we've got to think about these principles as Catholics. And for Catholics, we want to base our principles on the teaching of Christ and the Church. That's our basics. And that's not going to be easy. Making decisions in the light of our faith is not easy. And so we need to take those principles that we have, learn about the issues, and take them to our prayer life as best we can before we make a decision. But it's really our lifelong obligation, from our perspective, to say yes to God in all things. And that includes our political activity. And that's hard to do, but that's what we're being called to do. Now, of course, our commitment to the common good does not begin or end with voting. We have a responsibility to do charity work. And so many of our groups in parishes and schools and Catholic charities do great work in charity and helping meet the basic needs of people. But we also have an obligation to work together, whether in the legislature or more locally, to deal with the structural dimensions of problems. We have to ask ourselves, why are people hungry? It's great to provide food to hungry people and to work at the food bank and the food pantry, but why are they hungry? What is the structural dimension of that question? And we need to be thinking about solutions for that as well. So in fact, we call that the 2 feet of social justice. One foot is charitable work, the other work is advocacy. The other foot is advocacy, and we really need both of those, to move forward. You see the legislative concerns that we have, and those, what you'll see for 2017, I think will be very similar to that. At this point, we had to cover a lot of ground today in the time we've got. Sometimes we'll do presentations on the principles of Catholic social teaching and things like that, and I've got a couple handouts on that if you're interested. I've also got a handout I've got about 10 to 15 handouts if people want to hear something about conscience and how we inform our conscience. I've got more information on that. but in the time allotted today, that's what I wanted to get across to you. So the only thing I'd say is don't rely on talking points, because those are driven, political party talking points will drive you to one side or another on the issue. We've got to look at the underlying principles. I really believe this year the voice of the church is needed more than ever in terms of civility and what we need to find out from our leaders and who we need to have as a leader, what qualities are we looking for in a leader. That's something that I think we can have some impact on as we move forward in the next few months.